Rise up, live joy your way. From emotional intelligence through cognitive distortions, certified life and wellness coach Kamini Wood is on a mission to help people see the magnificence of their own unique human spirit. Through these small bites of self-visualization and self-confidence, you can have healthy relationships, success in business and career, and live the life you want to live. Rise up, live joy your way.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Rise Up, Live Joy Your Way, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening. Thank you for taking some time to hang out here with me for today's episode. And today I want to name something that many high-functioning adults, leaders, parents, helpers, and survivors recognize in themselves, but rarely connect to trauma or as a trauma response. People-pleasing, perfectionism, overfunctioning. Those patterns and how they show up are actually often praised. They're rewarded in workplaces, in family systems and social systems. They're described as strengths. And when I say that they themselves are described as strengths, I don't necessarily mean to say that people-pleasing is described as a strength, but the result of making sure everybody is taken care of often is seen as a strength. Because it's seen as reliability, it's seen as work ethic, it's seen as a sense of emotional intelligence. Oh my gosh, this person really knows and pays attention to what we all need. But for many people, these patterns are not just personality traits or preferences, they're actually adaptations. So in trauma-informed psychology, what this is actually called, these adaptations, it's actually under the concept of fawning. Now, there's a lot of talk around fight, flight, freeze. We've heard fawn, but not a lot of focus has put on fawning. And I really am offering this. I'm not offering this as a judgment at all or as a label. I just want to have a conversation around what this is as a way to understand how our nervous systems may have learned to survive different relational environments where safety depended on maybe being agreeable or useful or impressive or easy or the person who could anticipate everyone's needs. So this episode is about expanding the understanding of what fawning is beyond the stereotypical, and helping high-functioning adults see how people-pleasing, perfectionism, and overfunctioning can actually be part of a trauma response, even when life looks, successful from the outside. And let me be super clear. I'm not here to say stop caring, or to strip away anybody's generosity or willingness to help or excellent, work ethic. I'm not here to say that at all, but it's about just differentiating care rooted in choice versus care rooted from a place of fear. So I just want to start with what these patterns will actually look like in daily life. So people who struggle with fawning will often describe themselves as people pleasers, or they're highly responsible. They might say that they're emotionally attuned to others. They are reliable. They are hardworking. A lot of people will say that they're accommodating. Some will even say that they're flexible or considerate or empathetic, self-sacrificing. They may even say yes when they really mean to say no, or take responsibility for things that aren't theirs. Often these individuals will anticipate other people's needs before they're even asked, and they will be ready to smooth over any conflict. Like the moment somebody looks like, sounds like, appears to be upset at all, these are the people who are going to try to fix it and smooth it over as soon as that happens. And they strive to do everything right, and they feel uneasy if somebody is disappointed or upset. They over-prepare for things, or maybe even over-deliver, just staying hyper-aware of everyone else's moods, right? So the people who might resonate with this are the ones, like if you notice that you scan consistently about just paying attention to how everybody in your world is, you might notice you do this at work, you might notice you do this at home. This might be something that you might want to tune into and just pay attention to. In leadership, it can actually look like absorbing your entire team's stress or avoiding conflict to keep the morale stable, right? So like leaders will often be like, okay, I'm going to absorb all of this because I don't want the morale to dip, or they overwork to prevent criticism, fixing problems before anyone can even notice them, and managing everyone's emotions in families, keeping the peace, managing the emotional climates, like wanting everything to stay as stable as possible, being the responsible one, the one who manages all the schedules, suppressing your own personal needs. And then if we think about relationships, this could show up and maybe just taking note, like, do you find yourself over explaining or maybe apologizing excessively or maybe staying quiet to avoid tension, or saying the wrong thing, or adapting yourself to be more palatable. None of this looks chaotic when you're seeing it from the outside. None of it looks unsafe. And because of that, a lot of times it really goes unnamed, or it's just named as like, well, I'm a people pleaser, or I'm a perfectionist. But the nervous system knows the difference between generosity and self-abandonment or self-erasure. So it's important for us to just slow it down to say, okay, well, let's understand fawning a little bit, right? And to understand fawning, we need to understand safety. Now, the nervous system's primary job is not happiness or fulfillment. It's survival. It's about keeping us safe. When a person grows up or lives in an environment where conflict leads to emotional punishment, or unpredictability creates anxiety, or maybe an environment where approval equals connection, more of that transactional love, displeasure equals threat, or boundaries are not honored, they're just ignored, or even an environment where emotions are kind of dismissed, they're weaponized, or sometimes there's not allowed to happen. What ends up happening is the internalization of that is safety comes from keeping other people calm. Right. So fawning develops when maybe fighting feels too dangerous, like speaking up feels too dangerous, or flight. You can't flee the situation. That's not possible. And you can't freeze because that's socially unacceptable. So the system adapts to appeasement and keeping things as kosher as we possibly can. It's not manipulation. It's self-intelligence under that pressure, right? The body learns that if I stay agreeable, I stay safe. If I'm useful, I won't be abandoned. If I'm perfect, I won't be criticized. In my case, if I'm perfect, I'm not going to be a burden, and then people won't be upset. If I manage everyone else, I'll be okay. And over time, these behaviors become automatic. They stop feeling like choices, and they start feeling like part of your own identity or personality. Right. So we might start saying to ourselves, well, I'm a helpful person, or I'm responsible. I'm the flexible one. I'm the one who'll get it all done. And sometimes it's true, right? Sometimes we just are. We are those things too. And I'm not saying we don't want to be, but sometimes it's actually a survival pattern that was never questioned. And one reason fawning is so hard to identify is that often these fawning behaviors are actually rewarded. So if we think about workplaces, for instance, if somebody overfunctions and they're available and they're willing to put in that extra emotional labor or self-sacrifice, we think that they're great workers. And in family units, we look at it and we're like, wow, there's compliance, there's emotional caretaking, there's conflict avoidance. And so we reward that too. And then in social systems, politeness is it feels better than sometimes somebody being truly honest about how they feel, and, being likable over setting boundaries. Well, we want to be liked. And so we are, we even say, we'll even hear people say like, wow, she's so agreeable. And it gets rewarded. It gets reaffirmed. And so people who fawn often receive praise. They often receive affirmation and promotions and approval, reinforcing the belief that this way of being is not, it's not only normal, but it's actually necessary. It's necessary to maybe even keep whatever that relationship is. And so the problem is that the reward does not equal sustainability. So what looks like a strength externally can become an internal erosion, because over time, fawning will lead to things like chronic exhaustion. It can lead to resentment. It can lead to a loss of identity, sense of self, difficulty knowing what you want and need, right? So it's that self-abandonment. It leads to anxiety when you're maybe not being useful, or it's just this constant hum of anxiety about potentially worrying and fearing that you're going to disappoint people. And for some of my clients, I know that they've just struggled with burnout because they've just been going and going and going. And some even talk about like just that collapse after this long period of success. And that's why I think a lot of high achieving and high functioning adults do eventually at some point kind of reach a point where they recognize that they have been potentially living on or in overdrive for a significant amount of time. The central issue with fawning is it's not kindness, it's motivation, right? So when care is rooted, really truly rooted in fear, it does have a cost. And fawning backfires because what it ends up happening is it disconnects you from your own needs, your own internal compass of what you need. And it teaches your body that your worth is conditional. It teaches you that it's all transactional. It makes boundaries feel like they're dangerous and that you can't have them. And it creates resentment towards people who never even asked you to overgive, but they just became accustomed to it. And it keeps relationships somewhat in balance. So over time, your nervous system stays in this place of hypervigilance, right? Your nervous system stays in a place of constantly scanning and anticipating and adjusting and managing. And what ends up happening is you feel exhausted, first of all, but also your nervous system staying in that heightened state for so long generally will start to have physical and physiological outcomes as well. And truly what we're doing is we're not really truly building connection, where it's more about we're building this sense of containment. So I want to offer a distinction that might be helpful by saying, right, so I said fawning is care rooted in fear. Values-based care is care rooted in choice. And you guys, if you've been following me, have heard me say time and time again, values-based decision, coming back home to your values. And if you are making a values-based decision that revolves around care, then that is care based in choice. Fawning is care that is rooted in fear. Now, they may look very similar, right? So on the outside, they look similar and it's hard to distinguish between the two, but internally is where you're going to feel a difference. So if you're fawning, there's going to be potentially a feeling of obligation or pressure, or you might notice that you're making choices from a very anxious place. You might start noticing some resentment, some depletion. Values-based care will feel like alignment. It'll feel like agency. It'll feel somewhat like clarifying, like when you're making that decision, because there's this sense of generosity without you losing part of yourself. Some ways to ask yourself to distinguish the two is, am I choosing this or am I afraid not to do this? Does this align with who I am? Can I say no without fear of losing myself? So again, it's not about making you colder or unkind. It's just really slowing things down to pay attention to the choices that you're making. Healing fawning doesn't mean becoming selfish or losing empathy or just becoming detached from people and rejecting connection. It really just means developing a sense of internal safety so that care doesn't become just a reflex. It becomes an actual choice. So what helps, right? Awareness without shame. Begin by noticing when you feel compelled to please. Ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I don't say yes to this or I don't do this? Nervous system regulation. You can't logic yourself out of fawning, right? The body has to feel safe first, so regulation matters. What do I mean by that? Grounding. What do I mean by grounding? Breath work, mindfulness, right? Slowing down, pausing before responding. Setting micro boundaries. You don't have to be super dramatic with your boundaries. They can feel super scary. So set, small boundaries that can be repeatable ones. So even a small boundary could be, I'm going to need a little bit to think about that, or let me think about that and I'll get back to you. That's a micro boundary that can be repeated and it's not as scary. Fawning often seeks external reassurance. So it's really important for you to take some time to do some internal reassurance, and practice your self-talk, reminding yourself it's okay if someone's disappointed. They get to be disappointed and it's not my responsibility to own it. My needs matter. I don't need approval to be safe. And then I mentioned it before, values-based decisions. Return to your values. Whatever those values are, return to them. Let them be your guidepost for your behavior and the choices that you make. And as you're working through this and you're recognizing, okay, I might have these fawning tendencies, and I'm going to really try to work through that. There's going to be some pushback. I don't want to sugarcoat it, because here's the thing. When people have gotten used to you showing up a certain way, and you stop doing that, it disrupts what they know, right? So they're going to feel uncomfortable. That does not mean that what you're doing is wrong. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't work on shifting this dynamic for yourself. The discomfort is not the problem or dangerous. It means that growth is happening, and growth will happen for you and for the people who feel uncomfortable with the fact that you're no longer fawning. So just a couple things to think about. Where do I feel responsible for other people's emotions? When do I say yes out of fear rather than out of my own desires? What part of me learned that safety comes from avoidance or pleasing? And how does my body feel when I do imagine saying no? What would it look like to set a small boundary? What would that look like today? What could that small boundary be? And again, they're not about criticizing yourself or judging yourself. They're just to start getting the thought process going of how do we break the patterns of fawning? How do we shift from a place of fawning into a place of really being conscious about the choices that we're making? If you'd like to chat about this or anything else that you feel that would be helpful to support you in either your professional growth or your personal growth, feel free to contact me anytime at coachwithkamini.com. And until next time, stay well.
Thank you for listening to Rise Up, Live Joy Your Way. For more information, book a chat with Kamini at www.chatwithkamini.com or visit her website at www.kaminiwood.com. You can also find Kamini on Facebook or Instagram. Username It's Authentic Me. Thank you for listening.